Masih bersama saya Safrina Nasution dan kita masih berdiskusi bersama dengan Unicef Representative in Indonesia, Maniza Zaman. How are you, Maniza? Thank you so much for still joining us, and we will continue our discussion.
Sure.
So we're moving on to another issue, the digitalization. Today's children growing up in an increasingly digital world. How to protect children from the danger of accessing the digital world and also anticipating their screen time.
Yeah. Look, it's a great question. I think the digital world is one that has absolutely just captured us in so many ways, your lives, my life, and of course, the younger generation and children. In fact, a study here in Indonesia shows that 95% of 12 to 17-year-olds are online at least twice a day. That's a huge number, 95%, right? And that's the adolescence that we're talking about. But it starts much younger, much younger. And I think I can imagine as a parent, I can't imagine, frankly, raising children in this world, but we have to be pragmatic and we have to be practical and see how best we can support them and protect them, right? Our kids. So maybe there are a few things that I could kind of share with you. First is, I think, really parents, caregivers need to recognize that the digital world is or is going to be part and parcel of almost every child's life experience. So just recognize that that's a fact, and also try to understand as parents, as caregivers, what that world is about. We also need to understand what that world is about if we're have to support our children, right? I think the second thing is to have a really good and open communication with your children, so that as they traverse through their different stages of childhood, yes, they talk about their experience, including their experience in the online world. The open communication is really important, so that they can share what they're seeing, what they're learning, what their experience is. That's important. I think the third element would be set some parameters, meaning
hours of screen times, or
yes, indeed, set some parameters. This is hours of screen time. There are things you can do in terms of access to certain sites. So there are controls that can be put in, right? So I think there are certain things that absolutely, as parents and caregivers, we can, so that world doesn't become their only world. I think it's important also that we spend time with our children, our young people, to expose them to other forms of entertainment, socialization, be it sports, be it the creative arts, etc., being outdoors. I think that's really, really key. And maybe I think the last point that I would say is, I think it's important to also have the conversation on what can be put online and what should not be put online. So, for example, the permanency of what you put online. Once it's online, you don't take it out, right? I don't know whether children and young people really understand that. So we have a responsibility as parents.
It's very nice that you mentioned those issues, what to put online and what not to put online, especially on parents posting their pictures on social media for the kids, and also especially the privacy of those children.
Exactly.
And now it really sums up that technology brings benefit, but also brings some cost. And the other cost is also bullying that occur in cyberspace for children. How to anticipate those cases?
So the issue of cyberbullying that you've just mentioned, is extremely important, that we are all aware about it. I think especially the children. So the first thing is, let your children and young people know what cyberbullying is. What does it look like? What does it feel like? So that's kind of number one. I think the second thing is that we need to ensure that the children and young people have somebody trusted that they can go to. It could be the parent and caregiver. It could be somebody else who they really are close to and trust, that they are able to talk about it. they have to be able to talk about it. Because often what happens is the victims of cyberbullying, they don't say anything to anybody. They suffer in silence. And that's traumatic, and it can just continue. So they have to have that feeling that there's a safe space that they can go to and tell people about it, or person about it. I think the third thing, as we are educating our children and young people on this, is also perhaps good to say that don't immediately respond to cyberbullying, because it can just escalate, right? So I think a few tips in terms of when it happens, 1, 2, 3, this is what you can do. And I would also say one other thing is that as parents and caregivers, we also need to model respectful behavior, respectful, kind, even when provoked. There are certain ways of reacting. Children and young people are watching us. And I think they learn from us as well. Yeah.
Mirroring us.
Yes.
What are we? Yeah. What we do as
Indeed,
well.
yeah.
And in the midst of the challenge of the digital era, and then also the ever-changing, or very, very dynamic world, what is actually the ideal way of investing for early childhood education, not only from the education side, but also psychological side, holistic sides of it?
So I think, again, the promise of digitalization is huge, right? And firstly, let me just say that at UNICEF, we truly believe that the early years in so many ways are foundational. Whether the early childhood education is absolutely key. We see kids who have had that exposure do better in school, full stop. They're prepared, right? So now the issue is the digital world and the instruments that there are. I think it's important to realize that digitalization is an enabler. It's not the be-all and end-all. It's not the solution to everything, right? So it is, in the education system, it can support better learning. You still need your teacher in many ways, because the socialization, the interaction is important. I think digital tools can give children a varied learning experience, which then helps them get interested and absorb more. I also think that if we're going that direction, teachers need to know how to teach with digital tools, with the chalk and board, as we call it, the traditional ways, to again blend the different tools that they have. And I think that creates a really rich experience. So absolutely there is space, but it needs to be age appropriate. It needs to be tailored to the situation as well, right? So yes, I see a lot of promise. What I will also say is that there are some parts of this country, but certainly globally, where we're seeing a digital divide between those who have access to digital assets and those who don't. And that's a little bit of a concern, because the more we see this, we see certain segments of the population kind of grow so much faster, have so much more access, so much more digitally savvy, and others who may not yet have seen a computer. So we need to be really, really careful, or deliberate, I should say, in making sure that with this, we are not just really widening the gap, that we are also thinking about those kids who just are at a disadvantage and also focusing on them.
Right. Yeah. And adding up to that, before we are moving on to another segment, so we see the development of artificial intelligence, and also how does it affect the labor market in the future. Probably the message from UNICEF, what are actually the most important skills, human skills, that can be honed for the children in their upbringing and education, and facing those challenges in the future of artificial intelligence?
It's a great question. It's an interesting question, because I know that very recently there was the first global conference on this sort of AI for good, so to speak, or for development. I think the science is still developing, to be very honest. It's developing super fast, as we know. But I think there is real promise in it if we're able to harness it in the right way to address, I think, some of the really yes, big problems, economic issues, etc., but also some of the social problems that we are facing, social development problems. But for children and young people to keep pace, I think they have to have the skill of basically adapting, flexibility, because they need to know how to use all kinds of different media, tools, etc. So flexibility, openness of mind,
Openness of mind.
yes, really, exploration, curiosity. So I think all these attributes in the socialization of children and young people will be really helpful as they navigate this world.
Right. Thank you so much, and we will continue our conversation after the break, Maniza. Dan dialog bersama dengan Unicef Representative Indonesia, Maniza Zaman, akan kita lanjutkan usai jeda. Tetap bersama kami di CNBC Indonesia Prime Words. What can actually be done to address climate change risk and how to mitigate its impact for the children in Indonesia?
Thank you for asking that question. Look, it's a crisis. The climate crisis is a child rights crisis because we're just seeing so much unraveling of all the gains we've made for children. And in the future, that can worsen unless we take action now.